Welcome to the NAFEM Show and this debate panel session delivered by FCSI and kindly supported by Pentair Everpure. My name is Nielsen. I'm the editor of FCSI's Foodservice Consultant magazine, and we're here to talk about water treatment and how to choose the right system for you. I'm delighted to be joined by this fantastic panel of food service experts, and I'd like you all to introduce yourselves one by one. If you could tell me your name and just a little bit about your experience and your area of expertise. Tarah?
Hi, I'm Tarah Schroeder. I'm Vice President at Ricca Design Studios. We're a culinary design firm. We're lucky we're able to work in all different market segments and lots of different project types across the country.
Hi, I'm Cortney with Pentair Everpure. I'm the technical training manager, and I'm here to hopefully teach you about some water.
And Steve?
Yes, and I'm Steve Carlson with Rippe Associates. I'm the president, and I also lead the hospitality studio. But I have an opportunity to work in other market segments as I'm called upon.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah.
So earlier today I spoke to one of your colleagues, Tarah and Steve, another consultant, who said everybody's talking about water. Is that true? I mean, how do you see the role of water? Is it a secondary consideration when it comes to projects and your clients? Tarah, do you want to go first?
Sure, no, it's definitely not at all. I mean, it's a conversation that we need to have really early on to projects, whether it's a renovation or a new construction. On every single project that we're working on, just the water quality across the country is just in a place where we really need to have those conversations with the engineers to understand how it's going to impact several pieces of equipment that we're using. So it's very important.
Steve?
I would concur. When I looked at your question, I mean, it's not the first question we ask when we get involved in the project.
Sure.
Can you give us a sample of your water? But it's certainly we stuff that as soon as we start selecting equipment, we're thinking about it, right? And so we're talking about. I mean, I think Tarah would probably agree. I mean, we focus a lot on steamers and combi ovens because they're expensive, and when you heat the water, right, that's where you have the most issues there. So, but it's also, I mean, it's dishwashers, it's coffee. Ice machines in particular, so they all have different needs. What I think about this is, because I've been doing this for a long time, and our questions we ask have gotten a lot more specific about particular things in the water. It used to be just total dissolved solids. Now we're going to say, well, is it calcium or is it sodium or even chlorides and chloramines and all that.
So generally, are clients more informed about that kind of stuff?
I mean, I wouldn't say they are, but with a $50,000 combi oven, if they find out in 6 months they have to replace the boiler, I think they're really looking to us to make sure that we protect their equipment. And make sure we get the proper treatment. So.
Just to add to what you're saying, Steve, I think they're informed in the sense that if they have like a large campus, if they might already know if they've had issues with different dish machines or combi ovens. They might have already had to retrofit in some water filtration, so they might know about it. But typically, they might not necessarily know what their water quality is. All they know is like, we tend to have issues with combi ovens, related to the water.
Okay. Courtney, from your point of view, from the manufacturing point of view, how much of an education piece is there for you, both with consultants but also direct clients?
Well, water seems to be something that's known the least about and how it impacts equipment. So we're trying to kind of close that gap, and it's great to hear that people in the consultant world are starting to see it as a more important thing. The more we have these conversations, the more everybody's on the same page. It is a complicated thing because water varies all across the world. And even from street to street in certain cities, you may have good water here and there's a semi-different source across the street. So things can vary a lot, and we're trying to prevent a lot of equipment issues. We try to break things down between scale buildup, corrosion, which is the biggie, especially on the hot equipment, the steam that they're mentioning, and then slime and ice machines. But then there's the product quality side of it, right? Steve mentioned coffee. We want coffee to taste good, look good, smell good. It's an expensive item that a lot of people are paying for. So you're paying for an experience a lot of times. Ice is a food, so we need to consider it that way from a safety perspective and quality, and everyone wants a nice clear cube. fountain beverage, tea, anything that you're consuming, that's the product quality side.
Right.
So we're trying to educate and trying to simplify it as best that we can there.
And I guess just from what Steve was saying before, it does apply to a large proportion of the equipment. It's not just the coffee machine.
Right.
It affects everything.
Definitely. And there's even things like in grocery stores, proofers, where you're baking bread. There's a little spritz of water in there. That's a piece of equipment that a lot of people forget about. It's very subjective to corrosion. There are certain things in the water. Steve mentioned chlorides. Chlorides are dissolved salts, so like your sodium chloride or potassium chloride. If you have high levels of that and then you heat water, the hotter you heat that water, the faster that corrosion happens. Scale is the same way. The higher you heat the water, the faster it happens.
Yeah.
And certain minerals like calcium and carbonate are the ones that cause that scale. You can get other scales as well. But those are ones that aren't considered. But basically, in food service, anything that uses water needs some form of water treatment to protect the equipment or the product or both.
And Tarah, just going back to that conversation you have with clients when you start working on a project, is it something that you have to bring up and explain to them why it's important, or is that just something that comes with the equipment from your point of view, that you tell them that it just has to be that way?
Yeah, it's more the latter of just it's part of what we need to do is specifying the equipment. It's good to understand, what if they've had experiences in the past, and then just let them know that it's going to be part of the conversation that we need to have with the plumbing engineers. As we talked about, it's the water quality too. I think, for a while there, I feel like a lot of the engineers would just look at what the local water jurisdiction, what the water quality was. But, what we've learned is that it is really site specific. So sometimes we have to educate the engineers to make sure that they're actually testing the water at the site. And that's, there's certain requirements that these pieces of equipment have that Steve had mentioned that they need to be able to meet, and that we're going to probably need filtration to do that.
Yeah, and with water testing, you mentioned the municipality. There's things that the cities are testing for that are, safety related, right? The Safe Drinking Water Act, the government is saying you have to do these things. The things we're testing for equipment and for product quality are not going to be listed on the city's website or tested by the city.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they might have an equipment issue and they might call out a city or government official to do a test. And they'll say, well, your pH is fine, this is fine, everything's safe. Well, the things we're testing for is really more on that mineral level, the dissolved minerals. Steve mentioned total dissolved solids or TDS. That mineral content can be made up of all the things that are ions and minerals in the water. So whatever the rocks locally are made up of, that becomes dissolved in water, and that's your mineral content.
Yeah.
So things like chlorides, calcium and magnesium, sodium, potassium, nitrates, sulfates, these are all things we're testing for specifically for food service equipment. We do have specific water testing kits that test for that we can help you with as well. And with that water test, you actually get a product recommendation. So it's testing water quality, and then you let us know what equipment you have, and you get a appropriately sized piece of equipment.
So on a project about 5-10 years ago, we had some issues with chloramines, and I know Steve had mentioned that too. Is that another element that should be part of that testing, and is that something you're seeing across the country, or is it more regional?
That's a very good question. So what chloramines are, for the audience, is a type of disinfectant. So your primary disinfectant that the municipality puts in is chlorine, and we're all familiar with chlorine and kind of what that does. Chlorine causes taste profile issues as well as potential corrosion, especially when heated. But this other disinfectant, it's where they add ammonia as a secondary disinfectant. So you add chlorine and then ammonia, and that's used to keep the water safe as it's distributed out to you.
Okay.
The disinfectants are not part of the total dissolved solids profile. They are disinfectants. They should be tested on site for accurate readings, because what happens is they're gases, and they will gas off in the actual little water bottle itself when that's being shipped off to the lab. So you want to do that with test strips on site if possible. We can make some assumptions. Chlorine and chloramine use, those should be reported by the city on an annual basis. So that is something we can look into. But some kickers for chloramine, if you have an existing building, you mentioned a university, right? Some issues where chloramine might come through is in flavor profile of ice, and definitely fountain soda if it's not filtered out. So artificial sweeteners in fountain will interact with the ammonia in chloramines and impact the flavor profile. It's just an extremely off-putting taste.
Cortney, is that when you were talking about the chlorides that can cause, or things in water that can cause corrosion in poopers, is it chloramines that is that one of the things that will corrode?
Chlorine and chloramine can cause corrosion when heated, but they're not our primary corroders.
Oh.
And that's where a lot of confusion comes in. I always say chlorine, chloramines, chlorides, oh my.
Yeah.
Because what are they and what are the differences, right? So the chlorine and the chloramines are disinfectants, and those are very easily removed with carbon filtration.
Carbon, right? Yeah.
Right. So if that is our issue, we can take that out in a lower cost manner, right? Chlorides are dissolved salts.
Oh, okay.
And those are the ones that when you heat, they're just going to fall out of suspension and cause the rust and the actual corrosion in your
chlorides we have to be careful about. Okay.
And, if you're near the coastal areas where you have saltwater intrusion, you're definitely going to have it. Okay. But there are parts of the country and the world where maybe it was an ancient ocean a million years ago or 60 million years ago. So you're going to have salt deposits.
That's coming from the well.
Right, right. And so it can vary greatly throughout the country. Okay. And those are really the big ones. And the issue with that is because they're dissolved minerals, there's really not a lot of technology that can take those out other than reverse osmosis.
Okay.
Or there is a anion resin technology that we have that can help a little bit, but the primary solution for that is going to be reverse osmosis.
Yeah. Well, we should talk about when we use reverse osmosis and when we don't, right? Or when is it? Yeah, because that's like, I just remember because I've been doing this so long. At first, they thought, we could filter the minerals out of there, right? But you can't filter mineral out. You can filter some big stuff out of there, and that might help with preventing calcification because they can't attach to a particle or something like that. But I mean, to really take out calcium, do we need to use reverse osmosis so we prevent that calcification?
Very good question.
Okay.
So basically, the solutions can be bucketed a couple ways, right?
Okay.
So we have what we call base filtration, which is going to be filters that remove sediment, dirt, sand, particulate reduction, the big kind of chunks of stuff in the water, right? And then there's carbon filtration, or some combination of the both. That falls under base filtration.
Okay.
What carbon filtration does is removes taste and odor, so organic contamination. So, dead leaves and algae, dead fishy tastes and moldy smells.
Okay.
Carbon's great at that. Also removing chlorine and chloramines.
Okay.
So the actual disinfectants themselves. When your minerals are causing the issue, which is the issue with corrosion, those minerals are so microscopic. They're dissolved, right?
Okay.
Totally dissolved solids.
Yeah.
So those are so tiny that they're going to pass right through a carbon filter.
Okay.
So when the dissolved minerals are the actual problem, you need reverse osmosis, because reverse osmosis actually mechanically separates minerals on a very microscopic level. So we utilize a membrane that has microscopic pores in it, and those pores act to reject mineral content. Now, we don't get to pick and choose what that mineral content is.
Yeah.
It strips out between 90 to 98% of incoming mineral.
Okay.
So depending on what we're doing, taking out all that mineral might be great. So like in a steamer or combi oven, we don't need mineral for flavor profile. We just want to take it out so that we heat the water and it doesn't corrode or scale. But in coffee, we actually need a higher level of minerals. We want just enough, not too much.
Okay.
So reverse osmosis technology has come so far that we can add mineral back, we can blend mineral back in, depending on what we're getting at and what that water quality is. But the calcium carbonate, or the hardness that causes a lot of the scale, there are cost-effective ways to lower the scale buildup in a filter. So we can do that in carbon filtration.
Okay.
So in things like ice, coffee, things where we don't necessarily need reverse osmosis for corrosion protection, there's an ingredient that we add, or actually a mineral that we add to the cartridges called polyphosphate.
Oh, polyphosphate. Okay.
And polyphosphate actually attracts calcium. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it prevents it from sticking together with carbonate and forming rock.
Okay.
So it's all this little chemistry dance we're doing with whatever we do.
So
But your scale protectant filters have polyphosphate.
Okay.
Very comprehensive.
Yes,
That was really wonderful. Thank you.
No, but I mean, we're talking about water treatment, but I mean, Tarah and Richard Young gave a great seminar on Tuesday about total water usage, right? And I remember one of the things you raised about is look carefully at your reverse osmosis system, right? Because some use a lot less water than others. Is that right, Tarah?
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting. You probably can talk more about this, Cortney, but
Sure.
for what we've kind of learned is reverse osmosis systems, like the most efficient one is 1 for 1. So
Okay.
you have to use, a gallon to be able to get a gallon. But there's ones that you have to use 10 gallons of water to get 1 gallon
Right.
of water. So just being really intentional about that, because that could, increase the water use in the kitchen significantly.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I mean, by definition, RO is a wasteful process because a reverse osmosis is a system, right? It has to have a membrane to be considered a reverse osmosis. It's called a semi-permeable membrane. And that's just because it's separation on a microscopic level. But then there's usually carbon pre-filtration. We actually have remineralizing cartridges in ours, but it's a system with a tank. Sometimes you have a pump. Sometimes you don't have a pump. You use line pressure, whatever it is. But the faster you make water, the more efficient that system is, because it's usually a very slow process. We're literally squeezing H2O molecules through tiny pores in a membrane.
Okay.
So you need a drain so that the concentrated minerals have somewhere to go, or they'll clog that one side of that membrane. So we utilize higher pressure pumps to push or pull across the membrane to speed that process up, and then less water goes down the drain. So the faster you get it from here to here, the less water goes down the drain. Traditionally, like you said, traditional drinking water ROs that you can just go buy maybe online or at the store are pretty wasteful. They make 1 gallon of RO water and dump somewhere between 6 or 10. We have units that we have 1-to-1s. Then we have ones that actually go up to, for every 1 gallon of water you make, you only dump a quarter down the drain.
That's wonderful.
And that's a series of pumps that we utilize. They're bigger systems depending on what we're trying to do. So like a whole coffee shop, things like that.
Is this an area where there's lots of innovation?
Oh yes. I mean, I think the future is we're trying to be conservative with water, right? I mean, we want to be greener and all of that. So yeah, it's definitely about being more efficient with ROs. And then also manipulating that mineral profile. Because again, like in steam, we don't need a lot of mineral. We just need enough that water doesn't become aggressive because we've stripped too much out. So that we don't have as much to play with there. But in the coffee side, there's the switch, we actually have remineralizing cartridges now that add calcium and magnesium back in. It used to be, for the longest time, it was just calcium carbonate. We've discovered in the coffee extraction process that magnesium pulls out the good things and not too much of the bad things.
You mean there's
So
good
it's-
minerals and bad minerals?
Yeah, a little
Any
bit.
upon that?
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
Okay. Tina, I want to ask Tarah a question about
Go on.
one thing that can I do that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so one thing we always debate in our office is where do we locate the water filters? Particularly for the cooking equipment. We tend to locate them away from the heat, but then I think it also depends upon what your customer is, right? I think like the college and university projects that we both work on, they're pretty organized about their maintenance and preventative maintenance and the healthcare too. So I think if you put the water filter some distance from the cooking line, somebody will remember that serves that combi oven over there. But I don't know what you have. What's your experience, Tarah, about where do we put that water filter? I mean,
Well, definitely don't put it right behind the ice machine.
Yeah,
That's
talking about that.
That's
right?
never a good idea. That's never. You're never going to get those filters.
They forget it's there.
Exactly, and they can't access it.
Right.
So for us, it's just making sure it's. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing.
Yeah,
Steve.
it's
just
accessible.
line of sight, very visible, accessible, so it's easy to change. Because you want them to be able to change it 6 months or every year, whatever it is the protocol is. The other thing that I want to say quickly about going back to RO is we get questions a lot on the projects that we're working on. Well, should we just do the whole kitchen with an RO system?
Yeah.
And for me, with what we were talking about how much water you need to use in order to get usable water. We say no.
Yeah.
We say no. Let's just look at the pieces of equipment that really need it, where it's going to have the biggest impact, and we can do point of use RO systems for those pieces.
That's a great point, because reverse osmosis is not the cheapest platform. It's not the most cost effective all the time. So because it's a slow process, you do have to have a storage tank to keep all that water, the product water, so that it's on demand for the equipment to use it. So it could be pretty expensive to get a tank to meet the demands of an entire kitchen, right? Just because flow rate of an ice machine is going to be a little higher, or a fountain beverage, right? And the colder the water applications are, the less likely they are to have corrosion.
Oh, okay.
So corrosion usually happens on hot equipment. Now it can happen on cold, depending on what we're working with, but usually things like fountain, drinking water, and ice can get away with carbon filtration.
Okay.
The majority of the problems that we're dealing with there can be dealt with that, and then maybe carbon filtration plus scale protection, like on ice. But where like an RO would be needed, maybe in the same kitchen, but just for the espresso and the steamers and combis.
Well, and that honestly is one of the main reasons why we bring it up so early in the conversation, is because of the space requirements. Like if we're working on a large institutional kitchen that maybe has steamers, combi ovens, dish machine that need to be on this, it can get pretty large, the size of a water heater, and so you need to make sure that you have space for it.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear from you two, and you as well, Cortney, how on a kind of bigger picture level, how has the attitude to this area changed over time? Have you seen a lot of innovation, and have you seen people changing their attitude to it?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of innovation. Just what I saw, I stopped by here earlier to kind of get a little prep for this call, and there was, it was certainly a lot of differences since the last time I was in the detail and looking at those. I remember, do you still make for a while we were doing these giant central filter systems. This was going to take care of ice. It was going to take care of soda. But you had to make sure you took your water over here before you went to the polyphosphate feeder, because you couldn't send that to the ice machine.
We still have that. Yes.
Okay. I'm just thinking about
That's
it.
our most common system.
Yeah. I put that in a casino, Native American casino, where they don't necessarily have a lot of people that would understand 10 years later, that this little filter over here is feeding an ice machine that's way over there, and the coffee that's over there. So that's something. Maybe, I don't know if the clients have changed, but my view on that has changed. It's like, okay, I'm turning this over to somebody who isn't going to remember how this thing was done.
Sure.
So,
True.
I just think of it. I don't know. Another question I forgot to ask one time was on a project in Oklahoma. They were softening the water for the whole building. And then the soda people showed up, and then we put all the soda systems in the middle of the building, and they said, somehow they were able to run water from the somehow the soda people end up running water in their little braided lines and solve the problem. But otherwise, they were going to have to run a copper line.
They probably ran a hard cold line.
Yeah, 500 feet. I was like, I never thought to ask whether they were softening the water for the whole building. So,
right.
So that wouldn't make very good coffee. Certainly not very good soda.
Sodium can cause problems when they do that. Definitely. Product. Even ice won't necessarily form at certain levels. So, in a building that's completely softened like that, we will either have to have them run separate lines or use reverse osmosis to take out the sodium.
Oh, yeah.
So that can be costly again, too. So.
Tarah, how have you seen things changing over time?
I mean, definitely with what C said, the innovation for sure.
Yeah.
For me, you know, when I started doing design 15 years ago, it was sort of like you choose the equipment and you check the box for the accessory of a water filter. You know,
and they'd extend the warranty
okay,
sometimes.
Okay,
too,
there's
yeah.
a water filter. I'm good. You know, I
Yeah.
can move on to the next piece of equipment.
Right. So-
And now it's a system. It's a conversation. It's thinking about the whole, you know, the whole big picture of water,
Right.
like what's going where, what's happening, and even if, you know, we're not necessarily taking the lead with water quality, it's being there for the engineers, you know, and the client to be able to help have that conversation with them.
Right. I'd say, you know, I've been in this over 9 years now,
Right.
and I think there's been a real hefty change in the last decade, to be honest, at least from our perspective. The need for reverse osmosis has increased. In the coffee world, it's because, you know, coffee and specialty coffee is so huge out there, and there's higher expectations of the quality, right? So the Specialty Coffee Association and all these other groups are really doing a lot of work to manipulate and say, oh, what are the mineral levels that make the best coffee extraction? And then, you know, the change of the steam world is really big for us, right? So for the longest time, most steamers were boiler based, and you had a boiler unit.
Yeah.
And the beauty of a boiler is the water sits there all day long, and as it sits, all the minerals precipitate out. So your problems occur in the boiler. And now, when you take the boiler away and be a combi oven, and you're trying to be more conservative with energy and water, the issues are now happening in the cabinet.
Okay.
So the awareness of the customer is increased, right? Because instead of corroding a boiler and getting a new heating element and probe and a new boiler, you're getting a whole new machine now. And the manufacturers started to see that they were replacing things under warranty a lot in some parts of the country. And there are parts of Texas that will corrode a boiler in 3 months.
Oh, wow.
So if you're that manufacturer, imagine your replacement cost. And then imagine if you're the one who sold it, right? What happens to how somebody feels like you sold them a piece of equipment that was lesser quality or something like that. So we were kind of trying to, on the back end of that, and starting to see like, oh wait, this needs reverse osmosis. And so the conversation has expanded. The manufacturers have tighter specs on their equipment now. And a lot of times in the country, that's requiring reverse osmosis.
Okay.
So
if we don't have, I used to think if we didn't have a boiler, we got no problem, right?
Right.
But it's not the case. So we still need water treatment.
you're a little
even
better off with a boiler.
if you don't have a boiler. Okay.
It's a replaceable part, right? So if that fails,
Okay.
you're having the same problems.
Yeah.
It's just
But
they can replace
it's going to be in the
Right.
oven cavity instead of
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's the good news is they can open the door, they can see they have a problem.
Exactly.
So, final question for all three of you. Looking to the future and back to my initial point, I guess, about everybody's talking about water. Where do you see it all heading? Is it going to continue to move at speed, or is the awareness just going to increase? What do you think, Tarah?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think just even having a panel conversation on this was it just shows like how much this is a part of the conversation.
Right.
And I think just even, you know, the topics that we talked about water efficiency and water quality, to me are fairly interlinked. Just as we start looking for solutions, you know, of how water can support decarbonization goals and reducing water, and how water use and water quality is a big part of that too. So I think it's just going to continue to be a topic.
Right. Agree. Definitely. Efficiency is huge.
Everything she said.
Yes, double that. Efficiency is definitely an issue. We want to be greener. We want to have a healthier planet.
Yeah.
So everything's moving that way. More bells and whistles, easier serviceability, easier to specify, right? We actually have a website that helps with specification called everpuresizing.com. We have our water testing that, like I mentioned before, like if you do a water test kit with us, you can write down all the equipment you have and we'll give you the recommendation back. Obviously then with the design consultant side of things, we're doing a lot more in-house application engineering. So you can just give us your drawings and let us know where everything is, and we can help you run the plumbing and things like that. So I think it's going to continue moving that way, right? Making it easier. Unfortunately, because we're dealing with nature, it's not going to be a one-stop shop ever, right? So how do we simplify for the end user to understand, and then the dealers, the consultants, and the designers, everybody along that chain.
Steve, final word to you.
Yeah, I think
the future?
biofilms. I think we've got to focus on biofilms, which is, anytime you have running water or stagnant water, you're going to get biofilm building up,
Okay.
Particularly in the ice makers. And Cortney, you mentioned the slime,
Yes.
right? But I think, I don't know, I did notice you have some interesting solutions for that. I mean,
We
so
do.
one, it's really a danger, in my limited understanding, it's a danger when you use the carbon filter on the ice machine, you take out the chlorine, which would normally take care of the biofilm. So after you do that, especially if you're talking about ice in a patient unit or something like that, where you don't want to have bad things grow into biofilm.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how to make sure we
Right.
don't get that. So,
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that, but that's just my,
That's for the next one.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
I think we got minerals figured out. Now we got to work on this other thing. So,
Well,
Excellent.
to your point, we have an ozone generator
Yeah.
to prevent exactly that, right? So usually, for the most part, the slime buildup and the biofilms in the ice machine are not a water issue.
okay.
They're an air issue.
Oh, all right.
So it's a perfect environment for bacteria, mold spores, yeasts in the air to get in there and grow like crazy. It's dark and it's damp and it's great. They love
Right.
it. So to your point, a carbon filter removes the chlorine and the chloramine, which are a disinfectant that might kill that. But chlorine and chloramine gives us taste profile problems in
Right.
ice and so forth. So we still want to keep the carbon filter on there. So what do, right? And we have an ozone generator called Oxidize, where it puts ozone right into the sump of the cuber, and then the ozone goes into the water of the cuber, and then it gases off into the air.
Okay, and then that protects the ice in the bin. I mean, the classic story is the sub shop, right? The subway or whatever, with
Exactly,
the yeast in the
yeast
air,
in the
and then it
right.
gets into the ice machine, and
Right, and that
So-
the ozone's a great oxidizer to do exactly that.
Okay.
Prevents the expansion and the proliferation of those biofilms.
okay,
And there's a health component there. There's a lot of things, Legionella transmission.
Yeah,
that
particularly
is
with the
something they're
biofilm,
concerned
right?
about in
Yeah.
ice. So.
Well, I think we have enough for another panel session.
Yes,
Yeah,
we do.
right.
When are we meeting again?
Tomorrow, same
yeah,
time.
maybe. Yeah, hopefully there won't be a 4-year gap between NAFEMs,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, but I don't know.
Right.
Maybe we'll have the biofilms
Okay.
figured out in 2 years, right? So,
Well,
yeah,
thank you so much. Thank
Yeah,
you, Tarah, Cortney, and Steve.
Well,
Thanks
sure.
for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you to Pentair Everpure for the support for this panel. And please check in with fcsi.org for more video content. Thank you.